Who remembers where they were 11 years ago on this day? Perhaps I could jog your memory by saying, who remembers what happened 11 years ago on this day? The Boxing Day tsunami. That's right. And I'm just going to ask if we can have that slide. December 26, 2004. While most of us were still recovering from the perhaps overindulgence of the day before, the world was only just waking up to the disaster that was unfolding in Southeast Asia that morning. A 1,000-mile long or 1,600-kilometre long shift in the tectonic plates off the coast of Indonesia had created perhaps one of the largest tsunamis in modern history. One of the most widespread natural disasters resulted from this event. Is my clicker going to work? And so centred off the coast of Sumatra in Indonesia and affecting the coastlines of Thailand, Sri Lanka and India, and even causing tidal surges as far away as the continent of East Africa some 6 hours later. This tsunami killed nearly 250,000 people. Now it wasn't the most severe earthquake on record. It was 9.3 on the Richter scale, but it was the longest earthquake ever recorded. It went for 10 minutes. It wasn't the most severe earthquake in terms of loss of human life, but it was the most widespread natural disaster in modern history. And the clicker's not working, so you might have to take me through the screens, Jeffrey. And for the people who were holidaying in those resort places in Phuket, in Thailand, they were minding their own business down at the seashore when a wall of water coming towards them would obliterate everything in its path. And these are some of the scenes that you may remember seeing on the nightly news. Nothing could stand in the way of a wall of water that was probably more than 10 metres high and reached up to 3 kilometres inland, sweeping everything in its path and then sucking it back out to sea. And perhaps for a moment, you reflected on the fragility of your own lives. I know I did. It seems like a distant memory, doesn't it? And if we use the scenario of a tsunami is an event that happens in deep water, sends shock waves that travel very, very quickly over vast distances, but then as they approach land or the continental shelf of a country, they slow right down, and instead of just being a shallow wave, it suddenly slows down, rears up, and becomes a wall of water that will cause destruction on a magnitude that we cannot even imagine. That wall of water will take everything in its path and destroy life before it. And if we use that allegory of a tsunami, I want to suggest to you this morning that the only way to escape a tsunami is to heed the warning signs and get to higher ground. And I want to suggest to you this morning that the cross of Calvary is the seismic event of the ages. That the devil has been busily working behind the scenes ever since. And that he is furious because he knows his time is short, and that we are about to approach a time of trouble like no other. And our only way of escape is to heed the warning signs and make Jesus the rock of our lives. You see, We are in the midst of a cosmic conflict of tsunami proportions. We are in what we have termed the great controversy between Christ and Satan. And I want to share with you a passage of Scripture this morning that really focuses on and explains and highlights what the great controversy is all about. And if you'd like to turn in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 12. I'd like to read to you the verses, most of the verses in this chapter. A great sign appeared in heaven. Notice it is a sign. It is something symbolic. It is not literal language, but there is a message in there for us. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she was taken care of for 1,260 days. This is the Christmas story, but it's not one that you normally hear in a Christmas pageant. Because the Christ child came for a reason. The Christ child came here on a mission. And we don't talk about the dragon that attempted to exterminate his life the moment he was born. Very few Christmas pageants will focus on the story of King Herod and his soldiers killing all of the male childs under the age of 2 in the town of Bethlehem, because the Magi told him that the star had been in the sky for up to 2 years. We don't focus on that in the Christmas story, but it is every part of the Christmas story, because that great cosmic conflict that I told you about had now come down to our earth. Verse 7, there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. If ever there was a juxtaposition or contradiction of terms in one sentence, it is war in heaven. Do you associate heaven as a place of war? No one does, do they? We think of war as being a part of conflict of life here on earth. But there was war in heaven. Not a war as we think of, a war of ideas, a war of words. In fact, it is a war based on lies. The Old Testament books of Isaiah and Ezekiel give us a window of, if you like, on the origin of evil on our planet. And it tells of Lucifer, or Satan, and his desire to be like God. And 1/3 of the angels followed him in his rebellion. That was based on the lies that he spoke about the character of God. And so there was war in heaven. But this war has transferred down to our planet. And the devil began his lies to our first parents in the Garden of Eden. The lies that he began in heaven, he now transferred down to our parents. And our world, ever since, has been living with the consequences of those lies. Jesus described Satan as the father of lies. And if that story in Genesis chapter 3 tells us anything, it tells us about God's rescue plan for humanity. It tells us about the promise of a Redeemer. We have a woman and a serpent present in the garden. We have a woman and a serpent present in Revelation chapter 12. It's the woman and the dragon. It's the story all over. And every one of us, you and I, are engaged in this very same conflict. Because it is a battle for the hearts and minds of men and women and children. And somewhere tucked away in verse 5 of Revelation chapter 12 is the unspoken event of the cross. Somewhere between the birth and this child being snatched up to heaven is the unspoken event of the cross of Calvary. It's like the elephant in the room in the story. Something has taken place between the birth of the Messiah and his ascension into heaven. And what is it? And you and I know from the gospel stories that it was the cross of Calvary. The cross is central to the story of Revelation chapter 12. It is the unspoken event, and it fulfills the promise that was made in the Garden of Eden. Genesis 3:16. The seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, and the serpent would strike the heel of the son. You see, at the cross, the devil received his death knell, but it took the life of the Son of God to defeat the devil. At the cross, Satan was defeated, yes, but we still live in the present reality of a world trapped in sin and death. A world that is very much under the powers of evil. It's like in the Second World War, the Allied troops of Canada and America and Great Britain landed on the beaches of Normandy in June of 1944. And in history that is known as D-Day. It was D-Day for the Third Reich. But it took another 14 months of warfare before it was V-Day in August of 1945. And you and I are living between D-Day for the devil at the cross and V-Day when Jesus will come for his people. We are caught between D-Day and V-Day. Revelation 12 tells us that now he is cast down to the earth. Notice the following verses in Revelation 12 and verse 10. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. How did those who overcame be victorious? By the blood of the Lamb. And I shared with Joshua just this week the story of the Lamb throughout the Bible. That Jesus is the Lamb. And it is through the blood of the Lamb that we can overcome. It is the cross event that is dead center in Revelation chapter 12. We often take this war in heaven as being an event that was way back in the eons of time when the great controversy first started. And it would be fair applications to say that. But there's significantly more to this story. The war was at the cross. The war in heaven was for the hearts and minds of mankind. In the context of this chapter, it is the cross event that is central to the war that has been going on for millennia. And so, as I suggested to you, the cross is the seismic event of history. We measure time from before to after the Christ, don't we? The cross is the seismic event of history. And now the Bible tells us the devil is really mad because he knows his time is short. Revelation 12 verse 13. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the wings of two great wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to a place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for times and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away in the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus. You see, the devil created an inland tsunami, a phrase that was coined by our police commissioner after the floods in Toowoomba in 2011. An inland tsunami, he called it. The devil created an inland tsunami to sweep the woman, the church, and all that we know that is true about God away from the hearts and minds of mankind. And ever since, the devil has been gathering his forces for one last and final attempt at destroying the character of God and the name of God and the effort that Jesus has put in to save you and I. His forces have been gathering momentum throughout history. And we could say whether it was humanism, evolutionism, communism, secularism, materialism, and a heap of other isms, the devil is creating a situation in our world where he is setting up the world for his last and final deception. Revelation chapter 13 tells us that this deception will be so overwhelming, a spiritual deception that will sweep the entire world in its path. Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica in his second letter to them in chapter 2. And he says that the coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with all the works of Satan. Did you catch that? The word coming is the Greek word parousia, and it is only used in the New Testament to describe Jesus' second coming, except for this one time. The coming, the counterfeit coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with all the works of Satan, displayed in counterfeit miracles, signs and wonders. And they are the same words that are used by Peter in his speech in Acts chapter 2 to describe the works of Jesus and how he was accredited to them by God by miracles, signs and wonders. You see, our world is being set up for a great deception, a great spiritual deception. But Jesus has provided a way of protection for his people, because he said there will be a time of trouble like no other. A time of trouble like no other. Matthew 24, but he says, mercifully, those days will be cut short for the sake of God's people. Why? Because if they weren't, no one would survive. Jesus also said in Luke's Gospel, when you see these things take place, they are warning signs. When you see these things take place, lift up your heads because your redemption is drawing nigh. As we look around us in the world today, whether the events are in the political, the social, the religious, the economic, the environmental scene in our world, everything is pointing towards the second coming of Jesus. I believe we are on the verge of seeing events in our natural world that are going to make the Boxing Day tsunami look like a science experiment. Ellen White tells us that the devil is going to create such disasters and calamities in the natural world that he's going to sweep the entire world into his way and into following him and worshipping him. Because he wants to impersonate the coming of Christ. What does he want? Revelation chapter 13, what does he want? He wants the worship of the whole world. That is his goal. And so if you and I were faced with a tsunami warning this morning, it would be our responsibility to heed those warnings and to make our way to higher ground. The children sang that song this morning to you, making Jesus the rock of your life. Don't build your life on the sandy land, but build it where your house, your spiritual house, will not be destroyed. Tilly Smith was a young 10-year-old English schoolgirl holidaying with her parents on the resort island of Phuket in Thailand, staying at the beach called Macao. 2 weeks before, her family had flown into Thailand for their Christmas vacation. In her geography class at school, she had learned all about tsunamis. And she had learned that when a tsunami comes, the tide quickly recedes, and that a wall of foam will precede the waves that are coming in as the tsunami comes in. That morning of December 26, 2004, she, along with hundreds of other people, were down in the lagoon in front of the resort on Macao Beach. She saw the tide go out very quickly. She knew exactly what was happening. She ran and told her family. They screamed to the other families on the beach that day to get off the beach and in a real hurry. As a result of Tilly's knowledge, taking heed of those warnings, she saved the lives of more than 100 people on the beach that morning as they made their way to higher ground and then watched that wave come in and sweep everything in its path. Tilly heeded the warnings that were all around her, and she was able to save her own family. You and I are on the verge of the worst storm in human history. Did you catch that? Yes. We are on the verge of the worst storm in human history. It's a storm of spiritual significance. The whole world is going to be deluded by this storm. But Jesus has promised you and I that we can heed the signs, that we can escape to higher ground, and that we can build our lives upon the rock that is Him. Yes, the Bible warns us that it's going to be a time like no other. But God doesn't leave us there. He always promises a bright future for His people. We have a hope this morning because we know the one who came and gave His life on the cross, that we can be prepared to stand when the storm comes. I would like to make an appeal to you this morning. Would you like to be among those who heed that warning and make Jesus the rock of your life? And if so, I would like to invite you this morning to become a part of God's last day message, God's last day movement to warn the rest of the world that we are on the verge of eternity. May God bless you.